Thank you, Oliver. Thank you, everyone, for listening so far. So yes, I'd like to look today at the microbiome and how we can maximise it to produce happy, healthy pigs. So firstly, thank you obviously for joining us. Thank you for John Aldaker Foundation for supporting my scholarship, for Nuffield for choosing me and this project, for my employer Ampario for supporting my time on the travels, and last but not least, my family and friends, and most importantly, Mike, my husband, without which this wouldn't be possible. Okay, so if I asked for a couple of words that you associated with gut health, they may or may not appear here. But even then, would you understand what I meant by gut health, or in fact the microbiome? Well, for me, the microbiome is looking at the population of bacteria, fungi, and viruses that reside in our gut, and they in fact help us digest our food. And gut health is the terminology we use to describe it. So good gut health is a diverse and well-balanced microbiome, also called eubiosis or a state of eubiosis. Opposite to this is dysbiosis, and this is where we've got a disrupted gut. We may have pathogen challenge, or we're more likely to see pathogen challenge in that state. You may have given me words such as prebiotic and probiotic, and we've seen this in Mark's speech just before. Or you could have given me nutrients such as fibre. But in my mind, these aspects are actually part of the solution. And then if we take a step back, what's therefore the problem? Well, as we know, problems create space for innovation. And so in my mind, we should be looking at these as opportunities. And in the pig production herd, we've got a few. Medication use, we know year on year, we're getting harder and harder targets. Usually it's 30% reduction for pig production. And that's just been announced today in Pig World as well. Again, a 30% reduction on the medication use for the UK herd. But actually medication use is generally, unless really relevant, really needed, it's generally negative on the gut microbiome. And when we see high levels of medication use, we actually see more state of dysbiosis. It's disruptive, it's not as diverse as it should be, and therefore the animal is not robust. And it's more likely to see pathogen challenge after the medication stopped being used. So it's a negative cycle. We also use antibiotics or antimicrobials rather, such as zinc around weaning in pigs. And we're facing a ban by 2022 on the levels that we use. We use it mainly for post-weaning diarrhea to control pathogens around weaning. But in a recent survey or studies done in Denmark, it's only about 20 to 30% of the post-weaning diarrhea that's related to pathogen challenge. The rest of it is potentially antigens in the diet. So allergens because of the ingredients we feed, and also stress on the animal. Weaning is a hugely stressful period in time, and therefore we may need to be managing these pigs differently after the zinc oxide ban. And these top two lead to the next one, antimicrobial resistance. The others have covered this extensively, so I'll only talk about it briefly. But really, it's a natural process. Bacteria are going to evolve to deal with the situation they're in, and therefore any stresses we put them under are a potential for resistance. If we're not killing the bacteria, they're able to develop resistance against what we've been putting in there. So any medication we use obviously needs to be essential, and I feel this is an area we can never ignore. Lastly, cost of production. The best producers I went to see were more focused actually on margin over feed, lifetime performance of the animal, and the value within their supply chain. Cost of production potentially is not the terminology we want to focus on if we're feeding for gut health. This costs money in the short term, but long term, many producers are seeing benefits of feeding for gut health in not just reduced medication use, reduced mortality, but actually market accessibility. So potentially gut health or feeding for gut health can underpin or help us deal with all these areas. How? So you may have already heard of the gut-brain axis, or that the gut is the second brain. It's easier for us to understand or to think about how the brain might be affecting the gut and the microbiota that reside there. especially when we think about stress. The flight or fight response, cortisol, actually affects certain bacteria and can reduce them. And these could be beneficial bacteria we want to keep. So we need to think about the stress response on the animal. It can increase or decrease passage rate, which is why we may see post-weaning diarrhea with a stressed animal. On the other side, we know key bacteria are important for things like butyric acid production or butyrate, and this is hugely important to barrier integrity on the gut. If we don't have enough barrier or the integrity is not there, pathogens can move across the bloodstream, therefore affecting general health, not just gut health. Therefore, the gut-brain microbiota axis is a cornerstone of animal production, and we really need to be focused on this, not just for implications on nutrition, management, but also genetics that we choose for the unit. We need to put the pig potentially in focus and look at these things holistically rather than in silo. And that's actually what the best of the producers that I saw were doing. They were focused on that pig and all the factors affecting it. And they chose to discuss the management plan with not just geneticists, nutritionists, business managers as well. They had a whole group around them where they discussed gut health. And that's a really key point for me. Genetics. In pigs, we either have meal eaters or snacking pigs. If they're a meal eater, they all generally want to eat at the same time. If they can't do that, potentially we're seeing increase in stress, aggression, and some believe an increase in tail biting. This was key to my discussions in America, where sow aggression is potentially linked with genetics, but also gut health could play a role. Immunity. 70% of the body's immune cells actually reside in the gut, and therefore any inflammation in the gut has a direct negative effect on how the animal deals with immune stress. A healthy gut is a healthy animal. Nutrition. As a nutritionist, obviously this is close to my heart, but here I'd like to focus more on the macronutrients, fiber and protein ratios, for instance, fermentable proteins, fermentable fiber. The Netherlands, for instance, have reduced zinc already, done so for years, and they did this initially by reducing crude protein levels and feeding specific types of fiber, such as inert or fermentable fiber. And these are for the bacteria themselves. So I wouldn't want to just focus on additives. I'd want to focus on the fundamentals of the diet. Maternal transfer. This is a relatively new area, and I think we'll get more and more interest as we go forward. But it's really about ensuring that piglet is best supported from the sow. If we can look at the sow and focus on the breeding herd for gut health and immunity and nutrition, the piglet is better off. And that's because the piglet is picking up bacteria, not just when she's in the utero, but also the birth canal. And they digest or pick up about 20 grams of feces a day when they're with the sow, so before weaning. And therefore, fecal transfer is a massive impact on that microbiome of the piglet from its starting off. And really, if we focus only from weaning, we've potentially missed the boat. There's a gap that we may not be able to recuperate. And management obviously underpins all of these areas and is a real key factor in gut health. Feeding, not just for reduced stress, or managing for reduced stress. So if gut health is the solution, what can we do differently? Well, as I touched on, we can feed for gut health. So we can look at the protein and the fiber ratio in the diet, and it's potential that this obviously is going to change throughout the lifetime of the animal. We can support sow gut health through her feeding as well. Lots of countries actually were opposite to this. They were reducing diet costs for the sow. And I feel this will only diminish her lifetime performance and have a negative effect on her offspring. If we can support a healthy gut sow, we can actually have better performing piglets with less input on those piglets, less cost input potentially. And if we reduce any unnecessary medication in that diet as well, I think this obviously is one of the key areas, reducing medication use in total. But actually, if we only use individual medication, it's better anyway. We're not going to have as much effect on the gut health of the herd. We can manage pigs to reduce stress. This is a huge area, obviously. good management, looking at lighting, feeding, cooling, ventilation. But really, if we just focus on that reduced stress aspect, knowing that it affects gut health, I feel like we're halfway there. We can also look at supporting a strong immune system. So in the US and Canada, they were Canada definitely, were focused on gilt management and making sure that gilt coming into the breeding herd is at the best possible immune status. You know, feedback from sows, so using ropes that the sows chew on, passing back good bacteria and immune stimulation to those gilts. And potentially a closed herd benefits from this more. But the good producers weren't just focused on one or two areas. As I said before, they were focused really on that pig and the whole system, producing management plans, putting the pig in focus, investing in gut health and seeing lifetime performance benefits. Really, they're optimizing this gut-brain microbiome access. So ultimately, thank you for listening. I'm looking at accrediting my report with Aberystwyth University, so it will in fact not be out until next year. And therefore, if you've got any questions, please do ask them now. But if we don't have time, my contact details are there. And for those of you that are interested in the specific areas I covered on my travels, here's a slide for you. Thank you.